God. Oh God, it's time I've got the giggles. Oh dear. It's like recording those films again. Hello and welcome back to another episode of RGM. Today's episode we're going to be talking about the BBC Micro Model B, one of my absolute favourite computers. I first saw this computer back in 1983. I was 8 years old. I just started middle school, I think, and I saw it in the corner of the classroom and I was immediately drawn to it, as you are as a child. In fact, it was the first time I'd ever actually seen a computer up close. There was a game on the screen or some kind of educational piece of software. I just remember seeing a mouse, an animated mouse. That's all I can remember. If anybody can remember what the software might have been back then, please let me know in the comments. I may even already have it in this assortment programmed here. I've just not come across it yet. Of course, back then having a computer in the school was a big thing. There was one in the classroom. I don't think even every classroom had one. These are a British computer made by the BBC Corporation, or made for the BBC Corporation. You weren't allowed to touch them without being supervised, and it wasn't until 1989 that I remember recalling playing on one, and that was in my English class. There'd be two or three of us around the keyboard waiting our turn, and my favourite game back then was Chucky Egg, which I still play now, and so does my son. He likes it too. It's hard to believe that it's still so playable all these years later, even for kids of our generation today, in the year 2020 now. I've had this computer now for about 2 years. I started off with the actual computer itself, then I got the floppy drive last year, I think middle of last year, and just recently I've got the Cub monitor. I've been after the monitor now for some time. I never thought I'd ever get one, because they're quite hard to come across. You do see them on the eBay occasionally, but they're usually around the sort of £150 mark, 100 to £150. And I also thought about space, where to put it. That kind of put me off because I'm getting quite a few things in here now. But I bought one recently. It was sold to me as untested. Sorry, not working. The red LED light came on, that was it. I bought it. Sadly, it arrived damaged in the post. Cabinet was all warped. There is an unboxing video on that. If you haven't already seen it, I'll put a link below in the description. As you can see, I've got it up and running now. That's one of the repairs I've done, which leads me on to the next thing. This will be part one video of 3 in some of the repairs the BBC needs over the years when you own one. Unfortunately, mine developed a memory fault recently. I turned it on after not having it on for quite some time, actually, a couple of months, and there were some cursors up on the screen. I thought, what's that? I tried loading the menu from the SD card. That was all garbled. I tried to load a game from cassette. It partly loaded, but again there was all cursors over the screen and the game just crashed halfway through loading. Upon doing some research, I found out that it was actually a memory error. Now the BBC Micro has 2 blocks of memory, so lower 16K and upper 16K. There is a jumper pin on the board, so you can switch between the two, so that helps you eliminate which bank the faulty IC is in to begin with. But that didn't do it for me, unfortunately. I was getting nothing on one selection and just the garbled screen on the other. Then I remembered a video I saw, I think it was a year ago, on retro recipes. Periphractic, aka Christian Simpson. Great channel. If you haven't already seen it, I definitely recommend it. It's got our sense of our British sense of humour. He did a video with the Commodore 64 where he eliminated a chip fault using the piggyback technique, which I'd never heard of before. Now I know a lot of you would have already heard of that, but basically you just drop the identical new IC on top of the ICs that are already soldered into the board. Just with pressure alone, the legs, making sure they all have contact. you can eliminate which is the faulty IC, because basically the computer will start working again. It will see the new IC basically. Obviously another way you can do it is by feeling the chips, because sometimes they'll get hot if they're faulty, but in this occasion for me, none of them were. So thanks to Retro Recipes for that, because that actually helped me solve the fault. The other fault I had, when I got the RGB monitor there, I plugged it in after fixing it. After a short bit of excitement, I plugged it in and the picture was garbled again. But this time it turns out it was a video sync issue. So did some research on that, asked around a few people, well, one person, Retro Clinic, which I'll get to in a moment. And I found out, I've forgotten the name of the IC now, but it'll be in the video. There's a certain IC that controls the RGB syncing. In fact, there's two identical chips. One does the RGB sync output. And I ordered one of those and did a piggyback of that using the same method for the RAM. And sure enough, I found the problem. So, which is good. So I also rectified that too. And while I was there doing these repairs, I thought I'll recap the power supply, because these are well known to have the two Rifa caps go on them. Now I didn't realise, I owned this computer for 2 years, I didn't know that at the time about the power supply problem. And when I opened my power supply up, I noticed that the two Rifa caps had already exploded. And that hadn't happened while I owned it, because I certainly didn't see any magic smoke or hear any little bangs or pops. So I was astonished that the machine was still working, but apparently it can still carry on without them. These are just filter caps, it turns out, which help iron out any indiscrepancies in the voltage. Now I don't think that had anything to do with the memory fault. It could have done, I don't know, but if anybody has any information on that, please do let me know in the comments. But nonetheless, I decided to recap the entire power supply rather than just doing the two Rifa caps. I contacted Retro Clinic, I think it's Mark at Retro Clinic. I got a power supply cap kit from him, and the instructions are amazing. I could definitely recommend it, and he was really helpful as well. If you have any questions, you can just drop him an email and the answer's pretty much straight away. In fact, he helped me fault find on the Commodore Cub, sorry, not Commodore, BBC Micro Cub as well, which again there's going to be a video about that. So I think that's about it for the moment. So like I said, this is going to be part 1 of 3 videos. In the first video we'll cover the power supply recapping and refurbishment. So let's begin part 1, the recapping. Okay, just a quick note before we begin. Please make sure you've unplugged the power supply from the mains and that has been switched off for at least a couple of hours to allow the capacitors to discharge. Working with power supplies can be very dangerous. Capacitors do still hold a charge even when the device has been switched off and is unplugged from the mains. So please proceed with caution. Okay then, before you start work on the PCB itself and removing those capacitors, you need to get the PCB out of the metal housing. There are 3 screws that hold this in place, and you also have to remove some cables and a switch. You need to remove a main switch, the auxiliary port, 2 earth cables, along with the 3 screws, and we'll do that next. Okay, let's get started. First of all, remove the 3 fixing screws indicated here to remove the PCB from the metal casing. Before you move on to the main switch, it's advisable to take a photograph of it so you can see which way the wires go around. Sometimes they can vary in colour depending on your power supply. Gently wiggle off the spade connectors. If you do find any of these quite tight, you can use a pair of long nose pliers to gently pull them off. If you hold on to the rubber spade housing, and try not to crush your cable while you're doing this. It can be quite tight. Carefully remove any cable ties without nipping the cables. These will need to go back on as well to keep the cables away from the heatsink. Then there's 4 lugs to press inwards towards the switch itself to help release it from the metal housing. You gently push these down, trying not to damage them. I started from the top and pushed the top out first, and then I moved on to the bottom 2. This was quite fiddly. The switch does have to go in the same way it came out, so make sure you take that photograph first. There we go, it's out. Time to start on those earthing clamps. There are 2 of these wires that are screwed in with a nut and a bolt. It doesn't matter which way around you start. There is some resin on the nut to stop it from coming undone. I found the best way just to hold it with a pair of long nose pliers and use a Phillips screwdriver to turn the screw whilst holding the nut. There is a crinkle washer under here as well. Now it's time to remove the auxiliary socket. Again, this has some lugs on it. You just need to press inwards towards the body so you can pop the lug through the metal hole. It's advisable to remove both earthing cables first instead. Again, a pair of long nose pliers and Phillips screwdriver. I think there was another crinkle washer behind this one as well. Oh, there it is. And then you can just pop that socket through. You're giving it a little push. And slowly ease the PCB out of the metal housing. You need to wiggle it left and right, and it will come out eventually. Providing you've released all of the cables, obviously. Quick look over. Notice that some of these solder pads had red marker pen on them. That gave me the idea to mark all the capacitor legs with a blue marker pen so I know which ones to unsolder. There's the 2 Rifa caps. I'm going to remove those first. There goes the first one. And just look at the state of it. Time to remove the second one now. And there it is. Both of these had exploded, and a lot of muck was all over the PCB. These two capacitors are not polarised, so it doesn't matter which way around you fit them. I'm going to try using some pure alcohol now, the cotton wool bud, to remove some of that muck from the PCB itself. I think this had been on there for quite a long time because I found it quite hard to remove. I managed to get some of it off, but not all of it. Okay, time to solder those two capacitors in and begin removing the rest. That's those out. Quick visual inspection of the board. Couldn't really see any leakage from any of them. Was a little bit of a brown spot in the place. Again, just a bit of pure alcohol and a cotton wool bud to remove anything like that. In fact, it may have been flux. Quick double check of the instructions, make sure I put all the capacitors in the right way around. The board is already marked out with a plus symbol, so the long leg goes into the plus hole. It's always worth taking a photograph of the board before you take it apart on some other devices. The silk screening can be incorrect, so it's worth taking a photograph noting the positions of the capacitors that are already in that you're replacing. And that's the first one in. I won't make you sit through the whole procedure. I'll speed this bit up. Now I'm just going to reflow the solder around the transformer on all the legs, just in case there's any dry joints. And there's also a 4-pin input choke to resolder also. There is a small transformer near the end of the board as well you can do. And here it is all recapped. And then it's on to the reassembly, so just reverse everything you've already done basically when you took it apart. So at this point it's good to have those photographs that you took at the beginning so you can refer to them if you need to. Okay, time to try out the recap power supply. I've double checked it and triple checked the capacitors to make sure they're all in the right way round. I've tried the power supply before I connect it to the motherboard. Nothing went bang. Now it's all wired up, let's have a look. Fingers crossed. It would help if I plugged in the aerial lead, wouldn't it? Well, it's come on, so that's good. Yes, it's still working. As you can see, I have a memory fault there. This isn't because of the repair. I had this before. I will be covering this in a separate video. Well, there you go, it's all recapped, and as you can see it's still working okay. I've been using it now for probably a couple of weeks since I did that at this moment in time. As I said, this will be part 1 of 3 videos. I will put links in the description below as and when I get to film them. And in fact, you may already be watching one of those videos now, because it could be sometime in the future. I'll also add a link to the website where I got the parts from for the recapping. I hope you join me again next time for parts 2 and 3. Parts 2 will be for the memory repair and the RGB output, and part 3 will be the cub monitor repair. So as always, thank you for watching, and I'll be seeing you.